The following is a program of the Santa Barbara County Education Office. To learn more, visit sbceo.org.
Hi, I'm Susan Salcido, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools, and I am so delighted to introduce our guest today, Alana Walczak, CEO of CALM in Santa Barbara County, and really excited to talk about CALM as an organization and Alana as a leader. Alana, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Susan. Happy to be here.
I can't wait to talk all about CALM and your leadership. CALM does an incredible amount of work for youth and families throughout Santa Barbara County. But before we go into the organization and really you as a leader, let's go back to your childhood and where you were born and raised and grew up.
Sure. I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so there's not many of us Wisconsinites here in Santa Barbara. But lived there through high school and then went on to college, but grew up with my mom, my dad, and I have one younger brother, but spent the first 8 years as a single child, and then my little brother came along, and had a pretty traditional family life, but actually as I've started my work at CALM, kind of realizing some of my passions, some of the focus I have on this work to end childhood trauma really began in that childhood because I grew up in a family that experienced a lot of trauma. And so that really impacted me. I didn't consciously know that for quite some time, but as I've moved along in my career, realizing that some of those earlier experiences really impacted what I wanted to do with my life.
I'm sure it's impacted and influenced, but also made you a very strong leader. Those experiences really, who you are today is from the lessons learned from when you were a child, sounds like to me.
Absolutely, and just realizing that everything isn't always as it seems. So as I mentioned, I grew up in a very working class, blue collar family, but had everything physically that I could need, 3 meals a day, a warm home, but there were some gaps in the emotional connections in my family, and there was mental illness and there was substance abuse, and I was a good student and I performed well, but underneath the surface of that there were a lot of things that were going on for my family. And so I think that really gave me a sense that there's always more to a story, and you don't always know what's going on just by the appearance of what you see.
Elaine, it's so interesting too that you said just a moment ago that this is your life that you lived through, but it's really now that you're going backwards and identifying that, and it really shows the resilient person you are, but probably parallels what you see in many of our families that you serve. I would imagine.
And I think that sometimes even if and so I think I knew things intellectually, but didn't necessarily apply them to myself. But really in coming into this role at CALM over the last 3 years, learning about the importance of emotional connection and what's called attunement and attachment between a caregiver and a child. And it was really at that point that question marks that I had had about not understanding what some of the experiences in my own family were, that I really started to see things in a whole new way. And I think for the families we work with, the same may be said for them, that they haven't understood some of the behaviors that their children are expressing, or some of the things that they've lived through, and how that may impact their ability to parent or their ability to make connection. And so I think going through life, we learn things all the way along, and all of a sudden light bulbs go off, and we see things in completely new ways. And
so true.
For sure that has happened since I've started at CALM.
So Wisconsin, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, and so where did you go to college, and what did you major in?
Sure. So I went away to college. So I had applied kind of all over the country. I knew I wanted to move away. And I ended up at Washington University in St. Louis, or WashU. And my dream at that time was to become a pediatrician. So I majored in biology and psychology, was accepted to medical school at WashU. I was planning to go to medical school. deferred for a year and worked in a homeless shelter. And I learned two things. One, I don't like blood and guts, and I needed to come clean on that.
It's good you knew that early on.
Medicine wasn't the way to go, but working in this homeless shelter for teens, primarily runaway teens, really learning that physical health is not the only type of health that our young people need focusing on, and social emotional health for these young people was of much more primary importance than their physical and medical health. And so that was really a turning point for me to kind of think about what I wanted to do and how I could give back. And then I didn't know what to do because all my life I had wanted to be a doctor, and here I was deciding that that wasn't the path. And so did I want to go into public health? Did I want to go into social work? And I ended up going to the Center on Philanthropy, and I started with a one-year fellowship that turned into a master's degree program studying philanthropy, which the definition is love of humankind. And really that just broadened as a science major and as someone that was pre-med to be able to think about things in a more global context was really a great opportunity, but that led to my work in nonprofits.
Fascinating. And where is that center located, where you got your master's degree?
In Indianapolis.
Okay.
So it's based out of Indiana University of Bloomington, but since there's a richer nonprofit sector in the city of Indianapolis, the program's housed there.
And just a quick curiosity question about the homeless shelter for teens that you volunteered in. How did you find yourself volunteering there? Like what drew you to it?
Well, actually, it was work, but
Okay.
it was close to the university that I went to, and it was connections. It was folks that had been connected to the university that knew of that place, and it was a chance. It was a risk because it was really not a field that I knew much about, but I trusted the advice of folks in my inner circle, and so applied and ended up working there. And it was life-changing because that really changed the trajectory of my path.
Right. Well, let's talk about your path then, from there to here. What are some of the dots in between? Can you connect some of those dots for us?
Sure. So I worked. So I went and did graduate school and worked there in Indianapolis for quite some time, and was working in domestic violence. So after graduate school, fell into an executive director position in Indianapolis. In a domestic violence agency, and did that for a few years, and moved back to St. Louis after that, and really realized that as a 22-year-old, I had a whole lot to learn before being an executive director. I did that job for about 2.5 years, but really knew that I needed to dial it back and learn a lot about development, a lot about program management and administration. So worked in the field of early care and education for a few years in St. Louis, and then had the good fortune of moving to Santa Barbara, and have worked in positions really focused on children and families and violence prevention and intervention for almost all of that time. And right before coming to CALM, I worked for 9.5 years for PathPoint, which is an organization that supports adults with disabilities. And that was a little bit different for me. I needed to make a conscious break from working in the violence field because, unfortunately, often working in the field of trauma, organizations struggle to take care of their staff. And so I really took a conscious break to move out of trauma work, and had the good fortune of working in a much larger organization, which gave me a whole new insight on nonprofit management, but then realized when the position at CALM opened that my calling, my true passion was really working in abuse and violence issues, and so found my way to come back.
Yeah.
But had garnered lots of knowledge about managing and running a much larger operation.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful for me.
Alana, thanks so much for tracing that. As you're talking about that and sharing some of those dots and experiences, it's making me think about the fact that you were an executive director at 22, understood that you could probably continue to do the job, but you had a lot to learn. But some of the things it sounds like you learned had to do with something previous to that, which is the teens, the social emotional needs more than along the lines with physical needs as well. And that empathy piece where, I mean, I would say knowing you as a leader, you're such an incredible, innovative, smart, sharp leader, and you're super empathetic to people. You relate so well with folks and with everyone you speak with. But empathy, I would think, is a hallmark and trademark of who you are. And yet you were saying that in an experience before Calm, it really was difficult because of that. And it sounds like all of that's led to learning about yourself as a leader, still staying true to who you are, but really kind of rising above that. And how do you do that in terms of, being so empathetic, but in your work in Calm, and we'll talk about its mission, but really being a leader, but also empathetic, but serving a really high needs population?
I think it's a journey, and I think it's human. And for me, the empathy just came naturally. I think we all have that impulse, and I think again, it's very personal, because growing up in a situation like I did with some of the issues that my family struggled with, I think I learned to kind of see what might be going on for others and to try to put myself in other people's shoes in a way that I had hoped someone would do for me as a child, which unfortunately didn't really happen until much later in life. But I think that longing for connection, or that longing to be seen, helped me to realize that was a way that I could lead, because I could be that person that tried to see what other folks were going through. But there's a balance with that, of course, because if your life is so focused on service or so focused on other, you can very easily neglect yourself. And that has been absolutely a journey, that it's very important to replenish my own needs and my own self so that I can have an abundance of energy or an abundance of empathy to give to others. And it can be really hard, because we're dealing with very difficult issues at Calm, and our staff is dealing with very difficult issues at Calm, and there has to be time and space for those issues and for the feelings that are associated with them if we're going to do good work.
Yes, that's really incredible to articulate for me and for our viewers, so I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So for Calm, let's talk about Calm's mission. Not everybody knows Calm, though I think most people do. What is the mission? What are you trying to accomplish at Calm?
Well, our formal mission, it just changed a little over a year ago, and our mission is to prevent childhood trauma, to heal children and families, and to build resilient communities throughout Santa Barbara County. And I think with that mission, it's really reflecting the totality of the work that we're doing, but it also gives us a foundation from which to do new work and expanding work, which is something that we've been doing. And I think most people in the community do know Calm, but I think everyone I've talked to, many people that I've talked to, they know a piece, and they don't realize kind of the expansiveness of our services, because I think primarily we're known for treatment for children and their families if they've experienced trauma. But at this point, Calm is now providing a full 50% of our services geared towards prevention of trauma, and that looks like parent education, parent support, home visitation services, and those sorts of things are not necessarily known by the community at large, but it's a very important part of the work we're doing.
Yeah, one of the things that truly is important, and really thank you for sharing that new mission. One thing that I think helps people know a little bit better as to what Calm does is by visiting the offices. And I know you do things in the office, but you do things out as well. But in the office, and so is that one of the reasons why you've had open houses in some of your locations, and the locations are really county-wide? So say a little bit about the locations and the open houses.
Sure, so we have formal offices in Santa Barbara, Santa Maria, and Lompoc. We do try to do open houses as much as we can, because I think for community members to come in and see the therapy spaces and see the rooms where the work happens, it brings it to life, because our work is very confidential. A community member or a volunteer can't come in and witness a therapy session. We just cannot do that. But to come in and see the space and to talk about what's in a therapy room, that there are sand trays in every room, that there are big teddy bears in every room, that there are baby dolls and carriages in every room, and we can talk about some of the evidence-based therapy modalities that we use. I think it brings it to life. It also really, I think, makes it less scary. I think for many people talking about issues of trauma, whether that's abuse or neglect, or again, exposure to domestic violence in your home or mental illness, that can be off-putting, but when we bring folks into our space, we can really talk about the healing that happens and that there is an intergenerational cycle of abuse. These things are passed from parent to child, but if we do our jobs right, which I think we can interrupt that cycle. And for this family in this generation at this moment, we can stop abuse from carrying forward. And that's a very powerful thing to convey. And I think by welcoming community members into our space and having that firsthand experience, they can learn a little bit about that and really understand that this isn't an issue that affects those families over there, but that these are really issues that impact all of us and all of our families in some way.
And I think you've illustrated that with your words so well today. And if I can help add to it by saying that, Alana, you welcomed me and some of our team into your offices, and walking in, it is so welcoming, warm and nurturing, inviting really. And you can it's palpable, that feeling of knowing that you're going to get some incredible assistance, and there isn't blame and shame. It's really about healing and support and moving forward. So I would definitely confirm all that you said in seeing it myself. One of the things you talked about in your mission was around a resilient community. And so I want to point to an event that obviously is huge in our community, the Thomas Fire, the mud flows. We're still working through them as a community for sure. And you were a big part of the healing that needed to happen and the processing that needed to happen in many, many different ways. But in one of the ways is that you were speaking at an event. Can you say a little bit about what you were wanting to do with your contribution as a leader and an organization during those times?
I will say that it was not pre-planned. Nothing that happened.
True.
The work that you did and all of the educators, none of that, you couldn't prepare for something of that scale. But I think when we were living through the Thomas Fire, and then when the debris flows happened and there was such a sense of tragedy, it took a few days, but even those of us in the field of trauma, we woke up later in that week and realized that we were going through secondary trauma. We were not necessarily directly impacted, thankfully, by the debris flow, but we were feeling all of those emotions. And so I realized that in times of crisis, in times of just when things are out of sorts and nothing is normal, you need people to step forward with whatever knowledge they have and from whatever place they come from. And so realized that we had some knowledge around trauma and secondary trauma that could be very useful for our community at large. And so we tried to lean into that. And I had no idea that my remarks at the community vigil would matter so much to so many people, but they did. And I think they helped to normalize the experience and provide some education and context for the great depth of emotion that people were feeling. And trauma takes time to heal from. So our community, as we have just passed the 1-year mark of the start of the Thomas Fire and are approaching the 1-year mark of the debris flow, for many people in our community, they're still on their journey of healing. And I think it was our role to educate people that that's normal and that's okay. And that together as a community, we can build connection, which is a very important protective factor to combat trauma and tragedy. So I was really proud of our team because we leaned in ways that we wouldn't have expected. And I think having a new mission really enabled us to see that we had a role in helping the community. And of course, we leaned in very specifically with the schools that were directly impacted and the young people and the families and providing trauma therapy. But we also saw our role for the community in a larger context.
Well, on behalf of the community, I want to thank you for that. It really did make a difference, and you've said things that people really needed to hear in a time that they just were not hearing it from at that time from everybody. So it was really, really important. So Resiliency, Santa Barbara Resiliency Project is something somewhat new, I believe. Can you share what it is and who it's with and what it's for?
Well, it's very exciting.
Okay.
We're super proud of this. It is Santa Barbara Resiliency Project is a partnership between CALM, the Santa Barbara Neighborhood Clinics, and UCSB. And it's really changing pediatric practice in that we are screening for early adversity or early traumas, known as ACEs, which is an acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences, as early as the 4-month well baby check. So educating pediatricians and their staff to screen for traumas, and then also to connect these families, if they do have these early traumas, to early behavioral health intervention. And what's exciting about this, so CALM has therapists embedded with the neighborhood clinics. The pediatricians there are providing a survey to patients and asking them a series of questions about a list of adverse experiences that they may have experienced as children. So we're asking the parents of infants, and we're also asking the parents to answer the questions on behalf of their newborns. And they don't have to say which ones they've experienced. So they don't have to say if they've experienced sexual abuse or physical abuse or domestic violence. They just list a number. And if the parent has 2 or more of those adversities, or the child hopefully does not, but if the child already has an adversity as young as 4 months, they are entered into a study, and it's a formal study, IRB approved study with evaluation being done by the university. And we're tracking what level of therapeutic intervention is going to make the most difference for these families. And what's really exciting for me is that just like pediatricians talk to families about the importance of breastfeeding, or the importance of, when kids get older, of fruits and vegetables or a healthy diet, they're also talking about how trauma can impact the developing brains and bodies of little ones. And when that message is coming from a pediatrician who is a trusted advisor for so many families, that has a level of credibility that perhaps another professional may not have. And so it's really a blending of behavioral health with physical health, and really starting to look at health broadly defined. We as humans don't come in buckets of our mental health and our physical health. It's all interconnected. And so really helping these young parents from the moment they have these little bundles of joy to understand that the environment in which they're bringing them home to really can shape the future of their future life is very important. So
what a project.
It's
and
really
partnership.
it's really a true partnership, because for a behavioral health therapist to embed in a medical clinic, very different cultures, very different organizations, but that is how I believe social change happens. That's where systems change happen, and we're going to create the change within the clinic, which is a place that these families are used to and comfortable coming.
Really powerful, really powerful and impactful. And I think the information that comes from that can really shed light for so many others. Also, I want to say that it seems to merge so many of your lanes coming together, your pre-med world.
For me personally,
right, pre-med world to the
Yes,
community, to the
yes.
work that you do. It's all happening with that project. It's very exciting.
It's very exciting. I didn't have to become a doctor myself. I didn't have to deal with blood and guts, but I get to work with doctors now
Right there.
at this very early stage of children's lives.
That's
so
right.
For me, that's very exciting.
It sounds like it, for sure. So I have a question just as a person to person, not medical, not therapist, not institutional organization, just person to person, even mom to mom. You know, if a mom were wanting to learn from all of these experiences and being really proactive as a person with her children, to make sure that they're supporting their children to become really healthy, resilient adults. What advice do you have for a mom or a viewer who's listening to say, okay, I hear all this great work happening in the community, but just me as myself, what can I learn from this?
I think first and foremost for us as adults, whether a mom or a connected adult in a child's life, thinking about your own experiences, because as I was mentioning, early traumas do impact us. They impact us physically and can change the trajectory of our physical health forevermore.
Right.
But they also create roadblocks, emotional roadblocks and emotional triggers. So as a parent, myself included, having lived through trauma, I have to be very mindful and aware of those traumas so that when my children challenge me, as they should, as good 8-year-old daughters should, that I'm responding from a place of a deep breath, a place of patience, and not getting immediately triggered because this connects to my own history. So I think the more that a viewer, an adult in this community can be aware of their own background, all the better for their youngsters. And then I think there's really some proactive things of building connection. I mean, Calm's tagline is protecting the most important relationship in the world, and parent-child or caregiver-child, whoever that loving adult is, every child needs that one person. I think there's a quote, every child needs one person who's crazy about them. And it's really true, because if that child has that home base and a place of connection, and it's really time. We live in a very busy, digitized world, and if we can put our phones down and just take a moment to read a story with your child, or play a game, or go spend some time outside, those experiences matter. And I think also creating, we know from the work that's been done around trauma that it's not a death sentence, that you can heal and you can change the path. And things like good nutrition, healthy sleep, healthy activities, mindfulness. If we as parents can bring those practices into our children's lives and start that early, they will have the skills to carry those things forward, and that leads to good, healthy resilience.
Thank you for that advice, that real world advice for someone who's watching, myself included. It sounds like there's some personal work you can do on reflecting about your own life, but also in the moment, trying to not recreate or continue what might have happened in your life, but pausing for a minute, breathing for a minute. And then even on the medium and longish term, it's really trying to figure out how to enjoy, capture, savor the time that you have with your very precious children.
Because it goes so fast.
Goes so
you
fast.
Know this,
Goes
and
like
it
that.
goes like that,
Yeah.
and work will be there.
That's right.
Work will always be there. But yeah,
Right.
spending those meaningful moments matter quite a lot.
Alana, I would like to ask you probably a final question of our time together. I can't believe it goes by so fast. But in thinking about the youth in our community, they're growing up fast, as you say. They're graduating our schools, they're going into college, they're going to become any number of career paths, choices. What are some of the, as a leader yourself, what are some words of advice you might share with youth today to say, you know what, I'd really like for you to work on these things because you're going to need it? Yeah.
One thing that I think about a lot is this connection, because meaningful relationship is how everything really gets done. That's how work happens. And as we become more connected to our phones and our iPads, and I don't know, in 10 years what else will we have? I worry sometimes that our young people aren't spending time in space with other humans, or knowing how to do that, or how to communicate. And what we're seeing is that young people are feeling isolated. They're feeling depressed in greater numbers. The number of mental health diagnoses are going up because our culture is valuing isolation and individualization, and we're losing connectedness. And so I hope that young people continue to learn how to reach out and form those meaningful bonds and build connection, because so much goodness comes from that. We're human. We need that connection. And as we distance ourselves from it, we're seeing the mental health consequences. And then on a really personal level, I would just say, it all can get better. So if there's a young person that's watching and is really struggling, reach out. Ask for help. It's a good thing to do. It can help you, and know that whatever you are experiencing, it is temporary, and you can get support from others and move through it. And I think sometimes it doesn't feel like that, especially when you're a young person, especially with social media and all the pressures that are on our young people today. It can feel so important in this moment, but if they can breathe through it and rely on people that they trust, they can move through it.
Excellent. Alana, thank you so much for the wisdom you've shared today, your experiences, not just today, but truly in your influence in our community. You're just such a strong leader for us and so impactful, and we really appreciate your time and your advice. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And Same back to you.
Thank you.
Truly.
I'm Susan Salcido, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools. Thank you so much for joining us today for this edition of Schools of Thought.